welcome back to another episode of How Yoga Changed My Life, a podcast. This is Mia.
And Adrienne.
And we are once again recording from Blue Heart Studio.
Yes, we are. We just finished our third module for the 300-hour training that we're leading. And Mia, how was your weekend?
Good. I mean, it was a long weekend. I'm sure if you've taken a yoga teacher training, you're kind of familiar with those long days and lecture and practice. But one thing that we did this weekend that I really appreciated, and I'm going to continue to put some affirmation out there for it, is that the way that we taught this weekend, each trainee taught at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end. So it broke up when we were practicing, but it also broke up when we're sitting and being lectured to or with. And so right as my body would get tired from sitting and taking notes, we got to get up and move, and it was very energizing. And then I sat and had that energy and just ease in my body that I didn't have before. So I'm feeling much more energized than I typically do. Like after the first 2 weekends, in comparison, this weekend, I feel really good.
Good. I'm glad. For me, this weekend was really cool because we are adapting to the different styles of the teachers in the room and learning like, hey, you know, our training was pretty intense that we've gone through, that Nicole and Jenny and I've done in the past. And, you know, we have to have a little bit more, you know, give and take sometimes. And I think we gave a lot more. I think that we enjoyed it a lot more. I feel like we got a lot accomplished. Like we went through all of the chakra subtle body stuff this weekend. We talked about anatomy of the breath. We went through each one of the chakras. We went through body sighting, which is like one of my favorite fucking subjects ever to talk about. I love body sighting and being able to use props to figure out ways to get the activation in the body that you need. And it was just neat because coming from the first two modules and now the third module, y'all are starting to feel a little bit more comfortable with each other. You're starting to feel more comfortable in presenting and teaching in front of each other and in front of us. And like this weekend, every single person's meditations like dropped me in quickly. And I felt immediate like, whoa, that's amazing, you know? And just to be a part of that is just, it means the world to me because I don't want recognition. I don't want that. I'm not about that. It's more about I want people to teach other people how to do yoga. And if these people are coming into the third weekend and they're already starting to feel and change and grow in confidence and in relationships with one another, then that's all I need to do.
Right. I think also as a student, it's really enjoyable to be a part of a 300-hour training because everyone here has already done a 200. Everyone here has taught yoga to some level or extent, which is extremely helpful, you know, in comparison to a 200 where we're all coming in some way, shape, or form as newbies. Like perhaps some have strong yoga practices, but having to step into the role of a teacher is very uncomfortable. And so then as people are practicing that, you're experiencing their discomfort versus here, most of us are very comfortable with teaching.
True.
There might be components that we're uncomfortable with, maybe anatomy or cueing or getting off of our mat. But as it relates to like teaching, I can take a yoga class here.
Yeah.
Versus like that initial freeze for a yoga teacher. So it's really enjoyable to delve deeper.
And I think too, the hardest part for most teachers in a 300-hour is that they have been teaching and now we're asking them to loosen their grip on what they think that they know and be open to trying something different. Because that's the one thing about yoga is that there's many paths, one truth. So what's really cool is that this weekend we went through the chakras and the subtle body energy. And our interview last week with Susi really was perfect to talk about some of the work around the heart chakra.
And so I realized last episode that I always open up by saying, we have a really special or amazing episode for you. And like, there's nothing wrong with that. Of course, every episode or interview is special and amazing, but I want to get a little more specific with my language because there are, you know, and maybe it's that I do genuinely every time walk away very impressed. But Susi, as you're hearing this, I want you to know I loved our time and space together. We connected with Susi over Zoom And sometimes an interview can be, 20, 30, 45 minutes, but we filled a good amount of time and we could have kept going. Like this was one of those conversations where you don't want it to end. If this were a sleepover, we would have been up till 3 a.m.
That's the perfect analogy. Like, Susie, we're coming to Omaha. We're having a sleepover party because we had so much fun talking to you. And like, it really did feel like I was reconnecting with someone, even though I'd never met her before. And like, it's kind of weird when you're doing a podcast and people reach out to be on the show and you're like, wow, I'm so flattered that somebody wants to be on the show. But then you're like, well,
What's it going to be like?
Yeah. Like, are we going to be able to like have a good conversation?
Connect. Yeah.
It's going to be awkward, but I think because of the thread of yoga being the basis of this podcast,
It's so helpful.
it's so helpful because it's like the conversations just flow,
Right. So I want to get specific about my language. I am extremely excited to share this interview with you all. The work that Susi has done as a yogi, as a studio owner, as ultimately in some way, shape, or form, a healthcare provider is inspirational. It's life-changing, how yoga changed my life. And
hence the title.
And she articulates it in such a beautiful way. So I'm super excited for you to hear this episode. Let's just get into it.
I know. Let's just get into it. We'll talk to you guys afterwards. Have fun. Namaste, yogis. This is Adrienne.
And Mia.
And we have a special guest today on How Yoga Changed My Life, a podcast. Hello, Susi.
Hi, thank you for having me.
We're excited to have you. So Susi is joining us from Omaha, Nebraska. And we are very excited. She has a new book out. It is called The Centered Heart. And we can't wait to talk to her about her yoga origin story. So Susi, will you start us off by just giving us a quick introduction?
Well, my name is Susi Amendola, as you know, and I actually grew up in Chicago, the outskirts of Chicago, in a little town in the north suburbs.
What's it called?
And it's called Lake Bluff.
I lived in Chicago before I moved here.
You did?
7 years.
Oh, so do you know where Glenview is?
I used to teach at a yoga studio up there.
Well, that's where I studied yoga first.
Nice.
Wow.
Yeah.
How great.
I lived in Oak Park.
Oh, yeah, I know where Oak Park is, of course. Aw,
Yeah.
fellow Chicagoan.
Yep. I love it. I love it so much up there. I don't love it in the wintertime. I much prefer San Antonio winters, but summer in Chicago, there's nothing better. And just being able to walk around outside and see the architecture, it's just a beautiful place to live.
It really is. It was a little sort of a dream place to grow up on that North Shore there.
Glenview's beautiful.
Beautiful.
Cool. So you grew up in Glenview area.
Mm-hmm.
And then,
Do you want me to talk a little bit about how I got interested in yoga?
yes, please.
Okay. Well, I was 15 years old when I first got introduced to yoga. And what happened was I had an interesting thing happen at a party when I smoked weed for the very first time. I had a kind of reaction to it that was almost like a drug reaction, but it was like it kind of unglued my whole way of being. And I was in terrible anxiety for a very long time. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't leave my house, I couldn't drive. And it was like I fell into some kind of a hole that I couldn't get out of. And it was like I was inside of myself and couldn't come out. And it was so dramatic. Like it was so shocking for me that I ended up having terrible, terrible anxiety that lasted a very long time. And I was probably a junior in high school at the time, and I couldn't even go back to take classes. I started having agoraphobia where I couldn't go outside. It was terrible. And it was at a time back in the 70s when people didn't talk about their anxiety and they didn't talk about any of this.
No.
And so I was kind of afraid that if I came forward with how anxious I was, that I might be locked up somewhere. And so I kind of hid it and kept it to myself, and it made it worse. And at one point, my mom, who was struggling with stress herself and anxiety and all sorts of things, because she had 5 children in 6 years, and she was in her 20s.
Holy shit. Your
Yeah.
mom's a beast. It's
She is. And
incredible.
I know, she started doing yoga because she needed it for her own stress management. And she asked me if I wanted to go with her. And that was my introduction. I went to what was an ashram in Glenview, Illinois. And at that time, there was a Swami living there who had come. He had come to do some tests for the Menninger Foundation in Kansas, showing that yoga was a science. And he did things like lifted a knitting needle with his mind and changed the temperature in his palm by 10 degrees on each side. And he did all of these amazing things to kind of show that there were ways that yoga could yoga was really amazing, but there was science behind it. So met him, and it just changed my life. And I started taking classes, and it was the first time in maybe a year or two, it was probably a year, that I hadn't felt all of that anxiety and that suffering. There was a moment in Shavasana where I felt free. And I thought, oh, this is the answer. And so I actually moved to their ashram in Pennsylvania. I followed them out there and stayed and worked there for many years and studied yoga there. And so that was kind of my origin story. And when I left there, I married someone from there, had a child while I was there, and came back to his hometown, which was Omaha, Nebraska. And I didn't know where Omaha was. This is what's so funny. I had met somebody when I was 15 years old who said they were from Omaha. And I said, oh, is that in Montana?
That sounds like me. I'm terrible with geography. So bad. No idea.
Right. So I thought, well, that's probably why I have to be here for the rest of my life. But
Yeah.
it was a really hard transition to come to Omaha. And so I think that yoga really, in some ways, saved my life. And in many ways, it saved my life the first time because I couldn't function until I had this experience of yoga. And then as I started pulling my way out of it, and then we left the yoga ashram, I had sort of another fall where I ended up in the hospital with pneumonia and almost died, actually. And so I fell back into that old sort of pattern of anxiety and had to start doing yoga again. And I mean, I had to bring it like to the forefront in a big way so that I could pull myself back up. And one of the things that I did was I started a yoga center in Nebraska, in Omaha, so that I would have the community that I had when I was in the yoga ashram. So that was kind of how all of it got started.
I want to know about living in an ashram or on an ashram. In an ashram? Mm-hmm. Is it in or on? Okay. It's like, it's not a farm. So
at
ashram. Yeah. What was it like? I don't know what that's like. I've never been to India. Like, I've never experienced anything like that.
It's different now. I don't think there's many left in this country. There were a lot that came, there were a lot of teachers that came over in the 70s, and especially to the East Coast. So there were all of sort of the origins of yoga kind of in the US started there. Like all these different teachers came. There were probably 7 different teachers that came and planted themselves, including Amrit Desai, Yogi Desai, who started Kripalu Yoga, and Muktananda. There were so many students that came out of that ashram, and there was integral yoga started.
Oh yeah.
Swami Satchidananda. So there were all these ashrams sort of springing up all within sort of driving distance, and people would kind of drive between them and try them all out. But I lived there, and it was like, it was like this beautiful old seminary that had been turned into an ashram where you could stay, and people had rooms, and then everybody would work, for their stay. A lot of people would work for their stay, and then they offered programs where people would pay to come, and that would keep things going. And there were things like an organic garden. It was in the mountains, so there was like, you could go hiking, and there was lots of waterfalls, and I actually worked in the kitchen. I actually worked in the Montessori school at first because there was a school for children there, and then I also worked in the kitchen, in the Ayurvedic kitchen, as a cook for many years.
Wow.
So that was really a great experience because I learned how to cook Ayurvedic food from Indian women back, when that wasn't really something that I could have learned. Like there weren't any Ayurvedic institutes back then.
No, for sure.
I really got to learn about, yoga and Ayurveda, and studied, with some amazing teachers that were there at the time, that, many of them have gone on to write a lot of books and, have in their own right become, great teachers of yoga. So it was really fun to be there during that time. And it was also in some ways a little bit austere. People were pretty, you guys are great at demystifying yoga. And this was kind of the really mystical kind of, everybody wore white clothes when they did yoga. And it was that whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And yet at the same time, it felt like the community felt really wonderful, being able to sit in meditation every morning and every evening. Everybody did prayers, like morning and evening prayers together, and meditated together for an hour. And there was something so beautiful and so wonderful about being with a group in that kind of a setting. It was really hard to leave that.
What was it like from like a community standpoint? Like if like somebody, like, did you have a radio? Somebody was like playing a radio too loud, or like there was a community, discourse or whatever. Was there how did they handle it?
Yeah, because people were people, so there was people, and there was a lot of younger people at the time. Like I was 18, 19 years old. And, there was a lot of people my age there, and people that wanted to study organic gardening, people that wanted to study yoga, people that were interested in homeopathy, that were interested in Ayurveda. So it was kind of a big gathering, and people are people, and people would sneak out to get ice cream, and people would, and people would play like really loud music in the basement. In fact, my husband was a potter, and he would be like down there. And I think his friends and he would get high, but then they'd hide. It's like, it was like anywhere, kind of crazy, but wonderful too. Like, people, could be as austere as they wanted to be. And there were days where people didn't, we had silent Mondays where people didn't speak. And that was really kind of great and kind of weird. And so, and it was also a center where people from New York would come. So when I was working in the kitchen, there was our crew that all lived there, but then there were people that would come in, hundreds of people would come in on the weekends for classes and to hear the Swami speak and to hear these really great teachers, because that was kind of what it was. People would come from all over to hear them speak.
Wow.
So that part was really fun. There was like the Prince and Princess of Nepal came, and, lots of very, lots of really interesting people would come.
I can imagine. That would be really cool.
I think even Mr. Iyengar came through once, and Amrit Desai, people would come to see this teacher. So that was always really interesting.
Amazing. Yeah, it sounds like insular in a good way, right? Like insular in that everything came from this space. And so I was curious, you mentioned it was hard to leave, but that was also kind of what spurred creating your own yoga center. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Like, what was that process like? How long did it take you? Tell us more about that.
Well, the leaving was really challenging because we had gotten wind that there was some sexual abuse happening. And that was happening at a lot of the ashrams from a lot of teachers and all the different traditions and Buddhist tradition. And so we were kind of finding out about all of these sort of happening. In some ways, it was simultaneous, and it was happening to friends of ours. And so we left, and we left in very bad terms because the community was really broken by this, because people didn't believe it. And my husband chose to believe it and said, we're out of here. And it was very hard to pack up quickly and go. And so that's where the suffering came in, that I had really close friends, and it was a really wonderful place. And like anything in life, what the biggest lesson that I took from that was that people aren't just one thing. Like just because somebody is an amazing guru doesn't mean they don't fall from grace, or that they don't have their own demons or their own things that follow them. And same for us. Like, even though, it would be very easy to sort of fall into the sort of cult-like mentality and say, he didn't do anything, he's only good. And so that was challenging to sort of break away from that. And so my leaving was really, it was not something I really wanted. I really wanted to stay, but we just couldn't. And so starting that community was really hard because it was really unclear at that time whether I wanted to continue practicing yoga. Like, do I throw the baby out with the bathwater? Like, is all of this sort of tarnished because of that? And I think that took, it took its toll on my husband and I in our marriage. And we ended up ultimately getting divorced, and we're really good friends. But I think it was really difficult. He was very much about sort of throwing it all away. And I was not. I was really about, what can I salvage of this? Because I know that the teacher doesn't represent the teachings always. And that there was a place for me to have to find my own way. and my own path and all of that. And I think that's what, spurred me to start this yoga center, to have a community, my own community to be with. And I didn't want to be that kind of a teacher. I wanted it to be something where I was empowering other people,
Right.
empowering them to find their own answers. So it was really a challenge to kind of move from this like teacher centered, like guru centered relationship to sort of being the one that was the teacher and trying to pass on this lineage when I had broken ties with it. So it was challenging, but thank you for asking that question.
No,
Of course.
Yeah, Mia, I know you've got a question.
You mentioned not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, to wanting to hold on to the teachings and not the teacher. What were some of those teachings? Like, what were those things that kept you here and kept you with yoga?
Well, there were so many. I mean, first of all, just the teachings themselves had changed my whole life and had sort of saved me from my own, nervous system dysregulation. So, the teachings and the ones that I really write about in my book are really those techniques that yoga really offers for mental health and for physical health. So a lot of them have to do with, being able to practice relaxation and postures and breathing and meditation and imagery and all of those things that are so wonderful about yoga, that are so good for our nervous system, so good for our physical and mental health. So because I had had sort of this whole mental health shift, when I was really young, I really felt like yoga saved my life. And it wasn't, even though it felt like it was the teacher that saved my life during that time, it was the practices. And so, and of course, his teachings and his being also, he was both. And so I feel like it was just that whole experience that I couldn't just throw away because a teacher acted out of integrity.
Yeah. I was going to ask you too, like when you said like people aren't just one thing, and as we've learned over the years, that putting someone in yoga up on a pedestal and thinking that they're the end all be all is not yogic. Like, it's not the way you're supposed to be. And I think the fact that you found it so early in life, and this is what we talked about on the podcast before, it seems like when people find yoga in their teens, late teens, in college, it can be very impactful because that is the time of your life where you're really looking for some, coping skills that you haven't been given. And growing up, in the 70s and 80s myself, like it was, we didn't talk about mental health. There was a short bus and everyone rode on it that didn't have the look of everybody that was on the football and cheerleading team. You know what I mean? Like there was not a discussion about mental health. And I feel like when you said like that you smoked weed that one time and that affected you that way, I mean, I can't even imagine what that would have been like at 15, 16 years old, especially like did you have the correlation that that's what happened, or did that take you a while to figure out?
You mean the correlation of that, what happened, that it was the weed that caused it?
Yeah.
Oh, it was immediate.
Wow.
Like I went into this, like I felt like I had been given acid, and everyone who was there said, no, that didn't happen. So it probably was an allergy or something, but what it did was it left me with no coping skills because I had none. And so there I was in this place of just complete vulnerability. I don't even know how I got home. I don't know. And then I don't remember like months following, like I couldn't drive a car. I mean, it was profound. Like I was like, okay, 1 minute and not okay the next.
Whoa.
And so to this day, I wonder if it was something hormonal, if it was something, I don't know what happened. I'm like, I have no idea. But what happened was, as a result, like I don't drink and I don't get high and I don't do any of that, which is sad because that would be fun. But I just don't, because I just don't want anything. It took so long to rebuild my nervous system that I'm just really careful now. But I'm not precious. Like I don't have any sense that that's what people have to do or should do.
Right.
It just worked out well with the tradition of yoga that that's not something that they were doing. And so, that worked well for me because I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Before we started recording, you told us how your yoga center has been open for a couple of decades now, correct?
It's been open since 1983.
Okay,
That's
amazing.
insane.
It's 40 years.
40, that's
40.
amazing.
Yeah, so I think I've
so-
been practicing then 50 years.
Wow.
I hate dating myself.
No, it's
you're
fine. It's fine.
You're fine.
I'm the same
Yeah.
way. I feel the same way. I've been practicing for 30 years, so it's still the same.
I
Yeah.
mean, I love that you said you grew up in the 70s and 80s and 60s, 70s, 80s, that
Yeah.
you knew all, because that's, it's a time that a lot of people don't have a reference for. So.
No, like Mia, we were out with our friends one night, and Mia's like, we're getting ready to eat dinner. It was at Ming's birthday party. And my friend Tatiana's a couple years younger than me. I'm 49. And she said, Mia's like, okay, we got to go wash our hands. And Tatiana's Russian. She's from Belarus. She looks at me and she goes, in Russia, we wash our hands with dirt. And I was like, I know. We don't wash our hands before dinner. We never did as a kid. I'm like, we drank out of a water hose from the garden, you know?
Right.
We didn't care about that shit.
That's right. Exactly.
Sorry, Mia.
Yeah, things were different. Things
No
were different.
worries. And then for reference, I'm 27.
Exactly.
But
Great. I love it.
I thought Adrienne was going to go for a movie reference. She's always asking me like, have you seen this movie? And I'm like, I don't know what you're
I
talking
know,
about.
I know.
That's okay.
We
That's
can
okay.
stump her later, Susie. We'll stump her
yeah,
later.
Yeah.
Some
Yeah.
trivia. But what I was going to say is obviously, 40 years is a long time for a yoga space to be open and established, at least in Adrienne and I's experience. And that you were really conscious of not being the same kind of teacher that you started with.
Mhm.
What did that look like? How did you enter a space and hold space for others where they're able to explore yoga? They're able to explore the practices and the teachings and these really impactful, systems of ways of living and approach to living without putting yourself on a pedestal where they're relying on you, but instead they're relying on the community and the space.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think it was really clunky at first. And I think that I let some people down. And I think that there's something that I learned in that process, that it is important to embody your power as a teacher, that you don't want to leave people just hanging when they're looking to you for mentorship. And I felt that I, in the beginning, wasn't quite able to do that, mentor people in the way that I can now. It's taken me a long time to figure out how to do that and be kind of a role model for people, and also be who I am, be authentic and be who I am. And so I think it took me quite a bit of time to get in the swing of that. And I do think, I kind of, when I didn't mention this, but when I came back, I kind of did throw out the style of yoga that I had been trained in, which was kind of an ashram style, which was very gentle. And I started taking Iyengar yoga from a teacher that was living here. And so I kind of went into that and then realized, like, this doesn't feel as good for me. It didn't feel as good to be practicing that, because it was a little more mind-centered. Like, everything had to be so detailed. And I realized that I was needing a practice that felt more body-centered. And so even though I think that Iyengar yoga is really meant to bring you into your body through using those details, it just wasn't working like that for me. But I spent a good 2 or 3 years studying pretty intensely with a direct student of Mr. Iyengar's. So that was, a challenge to try to bring that style of yoga with what I had learned, and then open the center. And I wasn't sure what to call myself or what I was or who I was. So it was clunky at first. Mia, it was really clunky. Yeah.
It's so interesting because, like, when you said you've been open for 40 years in the center, it makes me think of, and I don't know if you know him or not, and my experiences have always been very pleasant, was Gabriel Halpern. And he's in Chicago, and he had the yoga, what was it called? Yoga Circle?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what it was. And he had that for like 35 years. And I remember thinking, like, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine, like, there should be yoga studios like there is, grocery store chains that have been around that long, all these different places. But yoga is one of those things where it's a hard space to bring people into. And I kind of relate a lot to your story about, developing your center, although I don't have a center, but like developing programs or developing trainings and like being a mentor and being a coach to people. It's hard place to step into. If you have a big ego, if your heart's in it for the wrong reasons, it's easier, in my opinion. But I've always been the one that's like, not the imposter syndrome, but more of like am I really giving what people need? Am I just talking to talk? Like, is it making sense? And I can kind of relate to how that must've been really difficult at the beginning.
Well, that's also probably why you're such a good teacher, because there's a lot of humility in what you're saying.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's a lot of humility in that. I did want to say that the biggest shift happened, I was sort of teaching, trying to figure out what style I was teaching. And then in 1993, Dr. Dean Ornish had a program called Lifestyle Medicine program that he was starting. And it was a program for reversing heart disease without drugs or surgery. And he was bringing it into the hospitals. And they were doing a study at a hospital. They had done the study first in California. And the insurance companies were saying, California is an altered state. People will do anything there. What if you did it in Iowa? What if you did it in Nebraska? What if you did it in, these Midwestern towns? And so he came to Omaha with Mutual of Omaha, which was an insurance company.
Oh, yeah.
And they set up a study and they were looking for a yoga teacher. And they happened to call me because I was one of the only ones that had done this kind of ashram style yoga. And the yoga that he wanted to use in his program for reversing heart disease was the same as integral yoga. His teacher was Swami Satchidananda.
Mm-hmm.
So he really wanted something close to that. And so I was really the only person with any kind of background that was even close. So they called me, and my first answer when they said, "Hey, do you want to work in a hospital at this study doing yoga?" I said, no, because I didn't want to have anything to do with hospitals.
I get it. I was like, why would you not want to do that? That sounds so cool.
Yeah. And I didn't know who he was, and I hadn't read his book, and I didn't really know, this was in 93.
I was going to say, yeah, that was pretty early.
Yeah. And I was like, I don't want to do that. And then, they came back and they offered it to me again, and they were working with the hospital here in town and in Omaha. And they said, well, we'll give you this amount of money. I said, no. And then they said, well, what do you want? Because they needed somebody and they didn't have anyone. And I gave them this outlandish figure and they said, okay.
Oh, shit.
And I was like, oh shit. Now I have to do it.
Oh my
because
gosh.
I was like on food stamps and I thought, oh my God, I'm going to have to take this job. So I did. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me. I mean, it was really the most incredible program. It was a program that eventually got covered by Medicare. It's still happening. I still work for them. But it's a program for reversing heart disease without drugs or surgery. And it has 4 different components and they're equally weighted. And one of them is yoga. And the yoga component has really 5 different practices. It's got postures, breathing, relaxation, meditation, and imagery. And so those are practices that I talk about in my book. But it felt like coming home to be able to be there and also to be with people who were struggling with their health and then see the impact that these practices had on them. Mm-hmm. It was absolutely incredible. Like I remember early on, there was a person that they put in our program because he was on the heart transplant list and they didn't know what to do with him while he was waiting for a heart. And like, go do this woo-woo program over there, go do some yoga and talk about your feelings and do a little bit of this and do a vegetarian diet. And anyway, about 6 weeks into the program, he came off the heart transplant list.
Stop. Holy shit.
And then that became the norm. And what we found out, like with now so many people who have been on heart transplant lists have come into our program and come off the list. And also people started coming off their medicine and not just their blood pressure medicines, but they were also coming off their insulin. They were coming off all of these other medicines. And we were like, what the hell is happening here? Even though Dean Ornish knew that was going to happen, of course. Mm-hmm. But we were all, as a team, were just shocked to see this. And, watching people come in and I was training even the nursing staff in some of the yoga practices. And they would, when somebody would come in with high blood pressure, they would teach them alternate nostril breathing. And then their blood pressure would come down. And so the nurses were super excited because it was like, wow, look at this. We can really help people here.
They could see it
So
fast, right? They could see
yeah,
it
you see it
happening.
really, it's very quick. And especially with heart disease. I think with other illnesses and cancers and autoimmune diseases, it's not as quick, but heart disease is so affected by lifestyle that it's very quick. And so that to me, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Like, I couldn't believe how quickly people were sort of recovering their health.
Mm.
And at the same time, it happened for me, when I was suffering, my health recovered from doing these practices. So it was really this beautiful process of being able to see how these practices really do help people. And that gave me more energy to go back to the style of yoga that I knew worked, that I knew was a practice that really worked for heart disease and illness. So that was and that was really the impetus for writing the book, was that I've been doing this for 30 years now, 30 plus years, and to really just put it out there that these are all evidence-based. And when I first started, you couldn't find any research on breathing practice, you couldn't find any research on postures, nothing on meditation. And now people are like, how did you research your book? I'm like, I went to Dr. Google, and it was like in 5 seconds, there were 40 articles on every aspect of yoga that I wanted. And in detail, the different things that I wanted to cite in the book were so easy to find.
It's so crazy to me. Like, and what an amazing experience. Like back in 93, you couldn't Google these people to find out who they were, right? And then you're like, oh my gosh, I'm seeing this happen. And at the same time, you're building your yoga community. And like, I mean, I get geeked out when someone hits crow for the first time in class. You're like literally changing people's bodies and lives and letting them live. Like, holy shit, I would come out of work every day and be like, oh my God, this is the coolest job in the world.
It was so funny how it happened. It was so organic. And, what really happened is I learned so much about yoga therapy, and I became a yoga therapist because of grandfathering in, because I taught maybe 40,000 hours or something. I can't remember. It was some incredible amount for over, in the hospital, I worked for 13 years teaching, people. And then I started training teams. So I didn't work with people individually as much, except at my center. But, it just, I think it was just, such a wonderful experience to get to see how this could really affect people's lives, that I kind of went through it without realizing the impact that it really did have on people until later.
Wow.
Because I was just so nose to the ground. And also learning about trauma sensitive yoga wasn't even a thing. But yet that's what we were trying to figure out, because every single person who's had a heart attack or had heart disease has some kind of trauma. And often they have a bigger trauma even before they've had their heart attack or their heart issue, because that's often leads to their heart issue. But, so I was really, trying to figure out, well, how is this working? And then working with doctors and learning the language, and, oh, this is what this means. And, oh, heart failure is this. And, so it was such a time of sort of taking it all in and trying to understand how this all came together and how this worked, that I wasn't really thinking about, woohoo, look at what I've done. Because I didn't really think of it that way. It was more like, wow, this is like, I just have to keep going because this is really important work.
Like you mentioned, you're having to figure a lot of this out in real time. You're working on the language with the doctors. And also you mentioned starting out, there's no research around the impact of yoga, especially on, on life and on health. And I think this is something that I talk about actually a lot. And I was just having this conversation with a friend, Brandy, of like, sometimes you feel crazy, it's like, this can change your life. And it's like, everyone around you's like, okay, she's talking about yoga again. Like, she's a little out there. And it's hard to be excited sometimes and share that with people because it almost seems unbelievable. Like, it seems impossible. Mm-hmm. And so I was curious, did you face resistance from, patients within the program at what point did that resistance change? And then also like from those outside the program looking in, what did that look like and how did y'all navigate it?
You guys are great question askers.
It's all Mia
Um,
today.
Yeah, no, it's both of you. It's really great. Thank you for just dropping into this. Yes, I did face resistance. And in fact, some people would say, are we doing yogurt today? They just didn't. It was like we were dealing with people who would never in their wildest dreams do yoga if their health didn't depend on it and if their insurance companies didn't make them.
Right.
So it was like they had to do it because they had to show certain outcomes for the study that they were in. So that was the part that was helpful, is that they had to do it or they couldn't stay in the program. But there was a lot of resistance. And sometimes the people that resisted the most had the biggest, most incredible outcomes in the end. And a lot of times what I had to work with was that people wanted research. And we didn't really have, the only thing we had was, we know this works because we're seeing it right in front of us. So we would say things like, we can find some research, which we did have some. We had some very interesting research, but we would say the most important research is the research that you're doing yourself, that if you're feeling better, then you are better. And that turned out to be true, meaning that when they felt like they were getting better, their numbers matched that. Almost always. Almost always. So I realized that this is kind of where I understood that we really do have what it takes inside of us. We know when we feel good, right? We don't need tests to tell us, although don't get me wrong, I think tests are great, but I think research is great, but I think that it's really important for people. And that's really why I wrote the book, was that people need to learn to turn this awareness back inward. Like I always talk about, the world of medicine is the world of an external locus of control, meaning that they believe that the medicines will heal you, the doctors will fix you, the surgeries will take care of it. And yoga is an internal locus of control. It's like, I am responsible for my own health and I need to tune in because I'm my best doctor. I know what's going on inside of me. And it doesn't mean that we don't take help from outside. It just means that we have more agency than we really thought we did. We really have all the cards because it's our bodies. And if we pay attention, then we're the ones that can kind of direct the show. We're the ones who can say, yeah, I think I need this, and I'll take a little of that. And I think I need this, right? And that comes with, at being a seasoned yoga practitioner. The more you practice, the more you sort of take back your life a little bit. You take back ownership of this body instead of giving it away. And so that was really something that, I felt was really eye-opening, that I really realized, oh, this is what yoga really does. It really allows you to really tune into your own inner healer, to your own intuition, to your own inner wisdom.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So my question / slightly, hopefully not too long story. My husband, when he turned 51, he ended up having a weird kind of week where he got a really bad migraine headache, and he was working and he ended up coming home, and I called our doctor and was like, hey, he's got a really bad migraine. He's never had one before. Little did I know that if you're over the age of 50 and you get a migraine for the first time, it's probably something that's indicating something more, right? I didn't know that. Neither did, I think, our doctor at that time either. And they prescribed him a migraine medication. He took it, did not get better. And then he started to say he couldn't see out of his right eye, and he was acting really weird. And I thought, oh my God, he's having a stroke. Ended up, he had a tennis ball size pituitary adenoma that had eroded the bone between the sphenoid sinus cavity and the brain, was growing into the sinus cavity. It had hit, Brian said it dropped, but I don't think he knows anatomy, because I think it pushed his optic chiasm and bent it, and that's why he was having trouble seeing. But they went in. I have a cool MRI picture of it, because I was like it was my friend's was a doctor there. And I leaned over his shoulder and took a picture of the MRI. And then I sent it to a friend of mine who was an oncologist and another ENT. And I said, what is this? And they're like, I could hear her, who's an oncologist, on the phone looking over her husband's shoulder at the picture. And she goes, holy shit, that's huge. I mean, it was really big. And it wasn't like a normal tumor that's like jelly. It was like a cookie, they said. It was like necrotic with blood. And then it was like they had to use like a sound vibration. They used all these tools. It took 9 hours. And they could only get like 95% of the tumor out because it was close to the carotid artery. But what's crazy is after all of that, his sight came back within about 10 days. You know, they basically went in through his nose and they had to cover the hole with like the skin. And I find like anatomy stuff, like gross stuff, really cool. So I was like, you know, on the camera watching the ENT go up his nose and like look at the patch and everything. And I'm like, this is crazy. But when he went through that, his pituitary died. So he has no pituitary functions anymore. So he's on all hormone replacements. And one hormone that they put him on originally was HGH. And he had lost like a bunch of muscle from being in the hospital and having this procedure and all this kind of recovery time. And he had 5 different doctors, right? He had an endocrinologist, an ENT surgeon, a neuro-ophthalmologist, a neurosurgeon, and, you know, all these different people. And none of them talked to each other. Like it was always me asking all the questions, writing everything down, and then going back to each doctor and going, okay, what does this mean? What does that mean? Like I was the biggest nightmare for Loyola at the time because I called them baby doctors because I couldn't remember what all the different levels of doctorship is. So there was like, you know, the fellows or the residents or the main doctors. So I just called the ones that would come in without the doctor stuff on. And I was like, they're the baby doctors. And I would just ask all these questions constantly. So cut to about 6 months later, and he's out at his daughter's college graduation. I think it was her college graduation at the time. And he started to not feel well. Well, he had to take 3 flights from Pensacola, Florida to Palm Beach or Palm Springs for a meeting in California. And that was like on a Saturday, Sunday. He's still feeling terrible. And I just knew my husband had never really been sick before this tumor happened. And I knew he didn't have a very good understanding of like how he actually felt in his body, very disconnected, like many of us can be. And so I said, just text me your symptoms of how you're feeling. So he's like, I feel nauseous. I feel like I've got the flu. I have tightness in my chest. And I was like, oh shit, I think you're having a heart attack. Mm-hmm. So I called my friend at Loyola. They called Brian and I said, you got to get to an ER immediately. Like you probably are having a heart attack. And he's like, nope, I do all my shopping at Loyola. I'll come home. And then my friend was like, if you get on a plane, you're probably going to be dead. And Brian's like, nope, I'm coming home. So mind you, that's always like a contentious point with me is I'm like, you motherfucker, you shouldn't have done that. You should have stayed there and gone to the hospital. But he ended up coming back and he ended up having a widowmaker heart attack. And he had 95% blockage of his LAD. And I remember asking the doctor, I was like, well, you know, I'm not a doctor, but I know HGH makes cells bigger, right? So couldn't that make the problem, because he had a little bit of cholesterol, right? He had a little bit of buildup before, nothing bad, but just a, you know, watch it kind of thing. I'm like, couldn't that have made it worse? And the cardiologist said, no, because the endocrine system doesn't, like the HGH doesn't have anything to do with the heart. And I remember thinking to myself, like, oh wait, can you back up for a second? Are you serious, Clark? Like that makes no sense to me because it's your body and everything that's in your body is somehow connected to the rest of your body. And I couldn't understand that. So like, it was a crazy, crazy time. Like he had to have the balloon pump put in, lay flat for a bunch of days. Like they basically said, like, when we pull out this pump, if he doesn't have a problem, if he, you know, doesn't stop bleeding, he's going to die, you know, like he's not going to make it. And it was incredibly terrifying, but I don't know why I told you all that, but I guess more just because of like your background and like, am I right? Like, could HGH actually do that to someone's blood cells or whatever?
I mean, I don't know, but that sure sounds fishy to me. And the fact that you're so tuned in to him and so tuned into you were sort of following it, it just sounds like that could have something to do.
Yeah.
Absolutely, because everything is all connected,
Mhm.
obviously.
Yeah.
How is he? What's happening with him now?
He's actually great. He's great. He is still on
Wow.
medications. You know, he still has to take his medications all the time. His health is way better. I've been trying we've been together for 20 some years, been married almost 20 years now. And I've been trying to get him to do yoga. And he's like, he's not into group classes. And so, because that's kind of where you find yoga, and he's not going to go to a friend of mine, and he sure as hell ain't going to listen to me. He's not coachable. So
Yeah.
I just let him do his little workout thing and tell him, well, whenever you want to, you can do yoga with me.
Oh, I'm going to send him my book.
Oh my God, that would be so sweet. That'd be so
Then it won't be
sweet.
you, it'll be me.
I love that. I love that. Thank you. Yeah, I mean,
We'll
it
be like a
just,
team.
yes, it's just
Oh.
crazy to me though, that the way
Yeah.
that like your body can just have these things going on, and he had no idea. He had no connection to have those feelings.
Well, that's just that really highlights, when I talk about postures in the book, I always say that in the tradition of Ayurveda, they say disease knocks 3 times, and if you don't listen, it takes you.
Mm.
And the practices of doing these kinds of postures, these gentle movements, doing them from this internal sense, that's how you listen.
Mhm.
That's how you do a few movements, really subtle movements, and then you're still and you just notice, like, what do I feel? What am I noticing? And I think that that's such an important point that, so many of the participants that I've had in the Ornish program, have come up to me and said things like, I knew, they whisper it. They're like, I knew something was wrong with me. I just wasn't listening.
Mhm.
And they're like, now I'm listening. I'm thinking, yeah, that's right. It often takes something really big like that before we go, yikes.
Mhm.
And sometimes even when people have a big, some big event like that, they listen for 2 days and then they don't listen anymore,
Mhm. Yeah.
So it really is, I think it's always interesting to me who actually gets inspired by an event like this. Like, who are the people that actually take that on and change their life? For some people, it could be something very small, like their blood pressure could go up and they change their lifestyle forever. And for other people, it's something very big,
Mhm.
you know. And so I'm always interested in all of that. And one of the things you said earlier, Mia, was you were talking about, I think it was about people, how do you get people to do it, or how do people, and one of the things that I don't do is I don't often tell people about it, because I realize that people have to find it when they're ready. And it was really interesting when I wrote the book, and my granddaughter, who's 12, picked it up and she goes, Mima, I had no idea what you did in your life.
Oh my gosh.
And I thought, because they used to, when I would go, they would say, will you do yoga with us? And I'm like, sure, and I didn't say a whole lot about that.
Mhm.
And so they were like, wow, this is so cool. So I think that people, when they're ready,
Yeah.
they find out about you, or they come to you, or they ask, or because I realize that we can't really make people do things that they're not ready to do.
Nope.
It has to be something that comes from inside of them.
You're
We
right.
can keep asking in nice ways, because sometimes they'll say yes after, saying no a long time. But I feel like it's something that there's a switch that flips in us, when we're ready to do it. And
Yeah.
doesn't happen with everyone.
Totally.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So
Wow, that's a story. Thank you for sharing that with me. That's
Yeah.
a really big thing. And for you to go through that. And one of the things that really stood out when you were saying all that is how much you love him and how much you supported him through that. And I think that, love and support is one of the big pieces to the Ornish program, and having somebody that loves you and having somebody that would go to bat for you
Oh yeah.
is one of the most important things in health and healing.
Oh my God, I pissed off so many baby doctors when I was there. I had so many conversations with doctors there that they were like, we get it. You're here and you're really freaking annoying. And I'm like, but I want to understand this because he doesn't. And right now, at the time, like, it was a tumor in his pituitary pocket. I didn't know, and neither did the doctors at the time, like, was this going to affect his brain? Like, was this going to make him, different? Was he going to get his eyesight back? We didn't know for sure, and the fact that that was growing they said it had at least been growing for 10 or 15 years. And the doctors that did the surgery on him, they actually now still teach and have written about it, because it was all about, like, they said 4 to 5 hours. It was 9 hours. And so, like, our doctor his wife had just had a baby. And, like, he was talking about, like, how, we had to use all this equipment. We were there for longer than we needed to be. Like, we had to make sure that our families were prepared and that we had other people taking care of other surgeries that had to happen that day. So it was, like, not only like a major surgery, it was also like time management, and like tool management.
Wow. Were you able to, during all that, how did you weather all that? Like, did you use your yoga practice?
Yes.
Or did you have to just throw everything out the window and just be with that?
So basically my yoga practice was not able to move because I was there. I basically, like, I had my kids and my friends are like my family up there. So they helped me out a ton with my kids. And I just remember, like, just being so scared and not having any control, that the only thing that I could do was to sit and write, to sit and take notes, to sit and, like, research stuff, and then just to sit with him and breathe, and just do my best to not lose my shit, because he's my world. And, like, to see someone like that who is so strong, and he's a big guy, and I'm like, I've never seen him like this before. And he's a very proud man. And so, not being able to work or not being able to see for a few days, he said that he learned a lot afterwards, because he was having so much pain, obviously, and couldn't see, that he had to, like, close his eyes and really listen to what people were saying. And, like, that made a big shift in the way that he interacts and communicates with people because of that now. So it's interesting. It's really, it's like you said, sometimes it takes a huge tragedy, and sometimes it takes something that's, I stubbed my toe, I'm going to yoga.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you for telling me that story. That is, it's just so interesting to hear, like, and just what you've been through and what he's been through.
Mm-hmm.
And it's such a huge thing to go through with you and your whole family.
Oh,
And
yeah.
yeah,
My
I'm
girls,
so
too.
glad that he's okay.
I know, me
Yeah.
too. Me too. Mia, did you
Yeah.
have something you were going to say?
Yeah, I wanted to ask Susie, you've mentioned it a few times, your book, and also you mentioned, this 13 years of working with this program, working with patients, obviously a long history and career in yoga, and I imagine it's coming together in this book. Can you tell us and our listeners a little bit about it?
Well, thank you for asking, Mia. The book is called The Centered Heart. And I think you talked about it in the beginning, evidence-based mind-body practices to stress less and improve cardiac health. And it's really about my work in that program, but also about the importance of managing stress and how stress contributes to most of the chronic illnesses we face today. Um, in fact, it contributes to not only heart disease, but diabetes, metabolic syndrome, autoimmune conditions, anxiety, mental health, all of those things. And so, it's really a book of sort of a guidebook for how do we shift out of the sympathetic nervous system, that sort of fight or fight stage of the nervous system that keeps us sort of revved up and unable to heal. How do we switch from that to the parasympathetic nervous system, and all the techniques in yoga that help us do that. I know that the CDC just said recently that about 75 to 90% of all doctor's visits are for stress-related illness. And about, I think workplace stress is considered the number one cause of life stress right now. And I think about 120,000 people die a year from work-related stress. And that also, the other stress statistic that I just read was that 3/4 of adults say that they have more stress this year than they had last year, which is just, so stress is really an epidemic right now. And so really I wrote this book with that in mind. In fact, the name of the book was supposed to be Stress Less, But the first publisher that picked it up and bought it, she loved the title, but then she went on to another job and somebody replaced her and they said, that title is terrible for this book. And I was like, what? I just bought a new website and I just did this. And I thought no, it's a great title. But I really have to agree with them. It really wasn't the right title because the book is really, it's a very sort of soft, open, sort of gentle book. And the word stress less is kind of harsh. And to have to say it over and over again, I feel like the word that I hear is stress every time I say the word stress less.
Right.
So saying the centered heart is so much more like it's like medicine, it's so much better than having to say the other. So when I wrote it, I really wrote it with this idea that there were a lot of techniques that really do help mitigate stress. And so I was like, I was really feeling that, that these practices help change the way we react and respond to stress, that we can't really change what's happening around us,
Right.
but we can change how we're reacting and responding. So, I think that, this was sort of the impetus. And the other thing was that people often will tell me that, they have stress, but that this is how they deal with it. They golf or they fish or they read or they knit or they have a dog, or they drink, whatever, whatever it is, they do mushrooms. I don't know what they do, but all of those things may, to certain extents, help mitigate stress in the moment, but none of them train you in flipping the switch of your nervous system.
Right.
Only these particular practices can actually do that. So each chapter that I wrote was like an intervention. It was like, this is how postures or gentle movements can actually help you flip the switch by learning how to listen and to move in ways that actually move you into a parasympathetic, rest and digest phase so that you can heal. And so each chapter I give more than, just more than a few practices. Like the meditation chapter, I give 5 different meditation techniques because not any one practice suits everyone. So you all know, because you teach and you have done yoga, that, not everybody can sit completely still in meditation and focus on their breath. And particularly someone who has COPD, or has asthma, that's the worst thing that they can do.
Right.
So I included things like candle gazing meditation or walking meditation for people who have trauma and can't sit still. So each chapter has, different techniques and why they're important, the evidence behind them, and how you do them. And there's even I've even put in scripts, like how you can talk someone through a centering practice. So, I've given it so that people can speak into a recorder, or they can read it to their children before bed, or they can read it to their yoga class or to their patients. So I did it in that way so that it could be really a tool, like a guidebook for managing stress. And, along with that, I included a QR code that goes to a website where you can listen to free practices that actually go along with it. So they're like the practices that actually do help change the nervous system.
I love that.
Building nervous system resilience and having a more adaptable nervous system. That's really the sort of keynote of the book.
I think it's great that you named it the Centered Heart. I love that name. I was talking to my friends at lunch today, and we said something about when you talk to kids and you say, you're at the pool and you say, don't run. All they hear is run. Right? So you say, walk, please walk. Yeah. And then they'll walk. Right. But if you don't say that, they're going to run. And so it's stress less. You're right. Stress. That's what you hear. Yeah. The centered heart is perfect.
It's really the same in the yamas and niyamas. When you hear the yamas and niyamas, when you hear nonviolence, it's like you hear violence. So really, when you're talking about ahimsa, you're really talking about love and compassion and, having a sense of, kindness, like creating a sense of kindness. So I think that when you flip things into the positive, it's much better for our nervous systems to hear it that way.
And our brains, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I say on the podcast a lot, and I believe this, that our brains are kind of like the worst case scenario handbooks, right? Always looking for
Yes.
things that are going to hurt us. And the more that we can, like you said, tap into parasympathetic, into the idea that we are in control and we can take care of it and we can get through it, you know, instead of different avoidance behaviors or addictions or, you know, deflections, you know, all of that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
exactly.
I could legit talk to you forever. So we're definitely going to have you back on the podcast because I want to hear more. I just really am very touched by you. I want one more question and then we're going to kind of wrap it up a little bit. But my last question for you is when you were writing your book, what was that process like for you?
Well, I didn't know I was going to write a book. And it was really interesting when I was working for the lifestyle medicine program. They wanted to have someone that would write articles about each one of the modalities. And they said, "Hey, will you write something about yoga?" And I thought, well, I'm not a writer. And I told this really funny story at my launch. When I launched the book here, we had a big party here at a bookstore. And I told the story that my son-in-law is a writer. He won he was nominated for a BAFTA in England for a comedy show that he did a few years ago. And one of the scenes in the show took place in a bookstore, and there was this annoying woman reading her book of poems. And like writers often do of shows like that, they'll put family members' names somewhere in the show, or they'll do something to sort of call out a family member, sort of in a fun way. So the book that she was in the background reading was a book of poems called something like "Killing Me Softly" by Susi Amendola. And so there was a stack of books that said the name, or something like "Whispers in the Dark," or I don't know what it was.
Oh my
And it said
gosh.
by Susi Amendola. And he sent me the book afterwards because he's like, "Hey, I put you in the show, blah, blah, blah." And it was, of course, that piece ended up on the cutting room floor, but I had the book. And when I got the book, I thought, oh, wow, that's cool. I wrote a book and I never had to write anything. And it was really interesting because it somewhere went into my consciousness that I was a writer. So,
Wow.
about a month later, when they said, "Hey, would you write for this?" I'm like, "Sure." And it turned out that I ended up being, I think, one of the only ones that didn't really need a ghostwriter. I ended up just having sort of a natural, sort of just some kind of a natural inclination for writing. And a lot of the articles ended up getting put in the Huffington Post. There was about 100 articles that ended up in the Huffington Post. And I thought, wow, I guess I can write.
Yeah,
So
seriously.
I know. And so I thought, I really, really want to say more about this program that I've been in. I think it's such an important program, and people haven't heard of it hardly,
No.
even though Dr. Ornish himself has been on Oprah, he's been all over the place,
Right.
but people don't really hear about the yoga piece that much and how important it is. And particularly how important these techniques are in managing stress, and how important it is to manage stress, that's really one of the most important things that we should do in our lives, because it determines everything else.
Yep.
If we can't manage our stress, we really can't live with others or with ourselves. So that was really the impetus. And when I started writing, I didn't realize this. I don't know if you guys know this, but when you write a book, they want you to do a proposal, and the proposal is like sometimes 80 to 100 pages long. And in the proposal, you write a couple chapters, and then you write all this other stuff that they want. And so I had written a couple chapters, and I sent it to like Sounds True. And I didn't realize that you have to have an agent. Well, a friend of mine who was a naturopath, she had just written a book and it was doing really well. And I said, "Hey, can you give me the name of your agent?" And she did. And I called her, and she said, "This proposal isn't going to work. Let's start over, and I'll help you with it." And we did it in like 2 weeks, and she sold the book in like a month.
Holy crap.
Like 2 months, maybe and I hadn't even written it. I was like, "Wait a minute, I didn't write it yet."
Oh, shit.
So,
how long? So what did they give you like after that? Like how much
well,
they give you
it
time?
was so funny because it was hurry up and wait. But they were like, they want it by, I think this happened in January, and they wanted it in May or March. And I was like, oh God, I better get
Whoa.
busy. And I was in Florida, and I had taken like a month off, and I just wrote. I wrote when I was there, and I wrote when I was here, and it just poured out of me because it was all stuff that I've been it's been in there for a long time.
Yeah.
And so it just sort of fell out of me. So that was really the easy part. That was sort of the easy part of all of it. The hard part was, of course, like just kind of working, figuring out publishing and figuring out all the stuff that goes along with publicity and all of that, that I'm sort of, the book, it launched and then they sold out on Amazon and then, and then we're like, oh my God, now there's no books.
Yeah.
Like all that stuff is just a lot. But just writing it was really fun. And it just felt so natural and so inspiring. It like helped me to be writing. Yeah.
That's so cool. All right. So we're going to wrap this up because I definitely want to have you back on the podcast. I want to talk about other topics. I think we should go to Omaha, Nebraska. And I think we should check out the yoga center. And I think we should go and like talk to people in your area and, share our love of yoga and get together with you guys. I think that's one of my favorite things about yoga and my yoga practice is the fact that when you meet a fellow yogi, it's like you have a friend for life.
That's right. Please come stay with me. Stay at my house, stay in Omaha, come to the center. I love you both so much. You're just so adorable and great. It was really fun being on this podcast. And I knew it was going to be one of the funnest podcasts I did. Can I say that out loud?
Yes, please do. Please do. All right.
I could just tell. And thank you so much for making it so fun.
Oh, you made it easy, man. You made it so easy. So the last question that we have is, what can others learn from your story?
Well, I think that maybe one of the things that I would want people to learn from this is just that, we all have this inner healer and that, it's always there inside of us. And it's if we just kind of go in and start talking to our hearts and creating this relationship with our own inner knowingness, our own inner healer, our own inner wisdom, our own intuition, that I think that that's the most important thing, to just call that back to yourself and know that it's there. You've got it and you've got this. You can do it because it's all inside of you.
I love that. Susie, this was so much fun. What a way to spend a Friday night. This was great.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was really fun.
I know. So we'll definitely have you back on. And then I'm serious, Mia, we're going to Omaha.
You don't have to convince me. I'm ready.
I know.
I can't wait.
Well, my daughter's going to college. She's going to University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. So I don't know where Omaha is in comparison to Milwaukee. But like you didn't know where Omaha was, I don't know where Omaha is either.
It's about 7 hours drive. It's far.
Okay.
But I love Milwaukee because, it's close to Chicago.
Exactly. I still can't believe that you grew up in Glenview. I mean, that's crazy.
I grew up in Lake Bluff, which is right there. Glenview was where my yoga center was.
That's so crazy. Yeah. I love that area. Well, thank you so much. And we will why don't you give your studio a shout out, give your center a shout out, give your book a shout out. Where can people find you? All the good stuff.
Yeah. Well, the yoga center is Yoga Now and it's doyoganow.com. And the book is yourcenteredheart.com is where you can purchase the book. You can get some free practices. You can, learn more. There's a whole bunch more on the website, yourcenteredheart.com. And, like me on Facebook, I'm there under Your Centered Heart. I'm also on Instagram as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you both so
Thank
much.
you so much. This was awesome.
Thank you so much, Susie. I love this interview.
Thank you.
I wish we could ask our listeners right now, so what'd you think? Like, I want to know because I just really enjoyed talking to her. She's got so much to offer this world. And like the fact that she got to do it, starting yoga in an ashram and like practicing in an ashram and like living a lifestyle like that young and starting a family and then being this person that was asked in the 90s to come and help figure out how yoga can impact the heart
And health.
and health.
Yeah, I think that's what's the most exciting for me in this interview. And, it was one of the questions that I asked, but if you have done yoga, right? If you have listened to the title of this podcast, you know that yoga is life-changing. And that's a really hard thing to convince people of.
Yeah.
Sometimes. And so it's so beautiful that it was genuinely life or death changing for the patients in this hospital and the patients in this program. And what a beautiful way to convince someone
I know.
of the value and merit. And it maybe not always happened. I'm curious how many continued on with yoga after the practice, because like she said, it's hard.
Yeah.
Yoga is foreign to a lot of people. Yoga has a lot of misconceptions. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of, what do I need to be a yogi? And so it's beautiful that this space exists, and that not only it exists, but it worked, right? People were removed from the heart transplant list. People
That's crazy, right?
were able to better their health for the sake of their lives. That's amazing. Yoga changes lives. And so I think that so perfectly exemplifies it. But at the same time, we're in this place as yogis, as yoga teachers, as book authors, where sometimes you feel silly sharing it. And I get it when you're, when I'm trying to think of a good analogy, but it's like, I'm up on the mountain and the air is so clean. Come on. It's like, yeah, but I got to climb up the mountain. I don't know what the analogy is.
It's actually a pretty good analogy.
Thanks. I can't think of one. I think it's something better, because I almost feel like a crazy person sometimes,
I know.
And people look at you like a crazy person. And I'm sure before I had yoga, I looked at people like,
for sure.
Okay, lunatic.
Right. Not only that, but it's like, if you think about fitness in general, like a personal trainer, they get a lot of like, oh, you're a personal trainer. Oh, you're certified. Like, oh, you've got knowledge. It's like, fuck, we have knowledge. But because we're in a field of study that doesn't seem to get as much street cred
Yet.
But that's what's great about Susi and what she's doing. And even just the fact that like, she was like, no, I don't want to do that. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I don't want to be a part of this. And then to do it. And then to hear her say like, not only the story about the guy who got off the heart transplant list, but that's the nurses.
Right. Them being empowered with this information and being able to utilize it with their patients is huge also. And I think potentially what is sometimes tough about yoga is not all of it is backed by science.
Right.
Right. So this project that she took part in, the Ornish project, was a study. It's backed by science. And that's something that we really, really value in the West, is empirical studies and peer-reviewed studies and science. Research. Yes. And so some things in yoga don't necessarily align with that or connect with that. But something that I like to remember, and I've brought up even in our 300, is that at some point in time, the things that we now know to be true weren't scientifically proven, and those people were looked at as lunatics too.
Right.
Like the idea that the earth revolves around the sun versus the sun revolving around the earth, you're a lunatic. Yeah. And you're also, you're also sacrilegious. That's a sacrilegious belief that you're a lunatic, you're crazy. And a lot of people so blah, 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 all that to say, even though some of the things in yoga are not scientifically proven at the moment, there are so many things that exist and that there is anecdotal evidence of, and anecdotal evidence over centuries.
Right.
And over different cultures that had no crossover.
Right.
That these things are hard for me to deny,
Right. Well, getting back to kind of the idea of science, right, and having research, there's more and more and more research being studied about yoga and meditation and breath work, right? And learning how, like, listening to Yesenia this weekend talk about the vagal nerve, right?
Yes.
And the vagus nerve, the vagus nerve, and how, nurses now know before they pump somebody with drugs is to take an ice bag and put it on their head to help to
or that they
stimulate
have options.
They have options, yes, outside of, and it's like
invasive
right,
procedures,
like basic options that are like, okay, you don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? You have the ability to fix someone or help someone or support someone simply by breathing, by stillness, by movement, whatever it may be. But yoga is something that is a tool in our toolbox that the more people learn about it, the less that we will suffer.
Yeah. So something we wanted to talk about today is it metaphysical? Is that the word I'm looking for?
I don't know.
what's metaphysical? My physicians? No, not my physicians.
I'm gonna look it up. You keep talking.
So the thing that we want to talk about today exists in this realm that we're talking about that's a little less concrete, right? And I think it's also top of mind for us because we just studied the chakras this weekend. And so we wanted to introduce the chakras to the podcast and to you listeners, and in specific, talk about the heart chakra.
So metaphysics is the study of reality and existence.
Okay, so it's not metaphysical.
No, but here's a better word, right? We always say is woo-woo, right?
I don't like the word woo-woo. I actually haven't brought that up to you in this training, but if you want to talk about it quickly on this podcast, we could.
Well, if you think about from a standpoint of, I say woo-woo because it's something that you can't see, right? It's something that's not tangibly accessible.
I know what you mean when you say woo-woo.
But you think it's got a negative connotation to it?
No, I think it has some like racist connotations.
Oh, shit. I'm not being racist.
No, okay. I know. And then I don't think so. I think that's just something that I've heard as, it's like attributing woo-woo to Eastern practices and also like potentially using vowels and sounds that are used in Eastern language to attribute. So
no. Yeah, definitely not going that down that rabbit hole.
Just mindful.
For sure. I love that I have a podcast co-host that is a millennial because she helps me understand when I'm fucking up words and when I'm being disrespectful. Not trying to do that this time around. What I was trying to do was say, like, if you think about something like energy,
that's
right?
Less concrete,
right? So it's not tangibly touchable. You physically can't see it, right? And science knows that there's energy around our body, and they've proven that. So I think when we start talking about the energetics of the body, it sometimes can come across as
made up
or not provable, or just an opinion, right? Or just a practice instead of something that's actually rooted in science, right? So keep going.
Yeah. And so we this weekend spent time with trainers and trainees talking about the chakras, and the way that there's energy around us, there's also energy within us. Within our body, there are these channels of energy called nadis. And there are 3 major ones in our body that run through our spine. So the crown of our head down to our tailbone. And these 3 kind of look like the DNA helix, winding around the spine and then going through the spine. And where they cross are these energetic centers called chakras.
Like a wheel, spinning wheel. It's a bundle of nerves, an area of your body like your brain, your third eye, your throat, your heart, your solar plexus. There's many different ones.
Sacral and root.
Yep.
I think you hit all of them.
Yeah, 7. There's 7 that we've studied today.
Yes.
Other philosophies or other studies will show you different or many more chakras. We study what we have deemed the 7 that we could relate to, correlate to, and, practice.
Yeah. And, there's this bundle of energy, and then I know you use the word nerves, but they're bundles of energy that correlate with very real centers in our body, right?
Where work is being done, right?
Yes. Crown of our head, third eye, throat, heart, all of these spaces that then energetically we see this connection and we see this exchange. And so today, because, Susi has done so much work with the heart in a very physical sense, right? In a very medical sense, in a very impactful way, we wanted to talk about the heart chakra in this energetic sense.
Yeah. I mean, when I think back to our conversation with Susi and just how much knowledge she has and how much passion she has behind the work that she's done and the book, Your Centered Heart, The Centered Heart. Susi's just really, I don't know, like I feel really inspired by her. Like I wish there was an opportunity for me to be able to do a study with medical science about yoga. But I just am really impressed by her abilities to not only do that, but also have a yoga studio in Omaha, Nebraska that's been around for 40 fucking years.
Yeah.
That's impressive. And I love the fact that we didn't even know when we talked before that she lived in Chicago, in Glenview.
Yeah.
It's so cool. But all right, so let's get into the heart chakra. So the heart chakra is, what's cool about the chakra system is that we have different attributes, right? And different feelings and different sensations, different diseases, different constitutions, right? There's a musical note that's associated with each chakra. There is a color. There is an oil or a smell. There's gemstones and crystals. There's, so many different elements to the chakras, but we're going to kind of dive into what is it in the heart chakra. So a heart chakra, or the Anahata chakra, is an attribute of someone that houses the heart and the soul. It's self-love, compassion, heart opening. It's integrated and balancing your emotions, finding that peace and that harmony. There's also the desire for self-acceptance, compassion, sincerity, and transformation. So when we talk about chakras, we'll talk about, like, sometimes you may feel like, whoa, I'm feeling really like up in my head today, or I'm feeling really disconnected from my body, or I don't feel grounded. You hear people say those kind of things. They're referring to these bundles of energy wheels in their body that they may not even know are there.
Yeah. And that might be overactive or inactive. And so what you just heard for the heart chakra is its attributes. So let's also hear what it sounds like when it's balanced and imbalanced, either excess or deficient.
Yeah. So balanced energy in a heart chakra is, you see the good in everyone. You're empathetic, compassionate, friendly, you're outgoing, you're charitable, you're secure with yourself, unconditional loving. You trust others, self, and the process of life. You're aligned with your purpose, and you are humanitarian. Now, with the heart chakra, it is not something that you're always going to be balanced, right? There's always going to be ups and downs. There's fluctuations of your body all day, every day, right? You have emotions, you have feelings, you have different things that pop up. So when you're considering these chakras, know that, like, you may go, well, I've never felt like that before. You might not have. But when I get into the excess and the deficiencies of it, you may go, oh, I kind of feel like that sometimes. And then you can kind of find that middle ground of the balance of it all. So when I tell you the balanced energy of the heart chakra, it may not really resonate with you. But when I start talking about the excess energy or deficient energy, you may feel like, oh yeah, sometimes I felt like that. Or, ooh, shit, that hurts. There is some of these that kind of sting a little bit, right? So excess energy, poor emotional boundaries, overly critical, being demanding, expresses inappropriate emotion, moody, melodramatic. I love that word, by the way. Melodramatic. Somebody who acts like a martyr. Somebody who could be codependent. Holds things over others. Uses money or sex to control others. And then a deficient energy can be indecisiveness, being paranoid, having self-pity, or this feeling of like, I can't feel any emotions, heartless, ruthless, unprincipled behavior, being afraid of rejection, needing like constant assurance or reassurance, hangs on to painful relationships, afraid to let go and move on. So maybe you've experienced either excess or deficient energy in this area, and you can relate to some of those things. But the idea is that you can also alter how your heart chakra is being energized or not energized by practicing different things. So like, for example, the heart chakra is not only like this bundle of energy, this wheel, it also is part of your system of your body. It impacts the thymus gland, your lymph glands or lymph nodes, your heart, your rib cage, your lungs, your skin, your immune system, your hands and your arms. And with a lot of these, each chakra will have a dis-ease. So if you have an overactive heart chakra or an underactive heart chakra, you could have difficulty with your breath. You could have lung issues. You could have anger, negativity, paranoia, which I said before, high blood pressure, you could have a heart attack, heart pain, weakened immunity, cancer, breast cancer. Those things can actually be correlated back to the energy around your heart center. So what I love about the chakras is that if you were to say, okay, well, I don't want to move my body, but I can meditate, or I want to journal. There's so many different exercises that you can do that will help you find balance within your body in all these different elements of the chakra system. So these 7 little bundles in your body, they're all interconnected, just like, you know, your heart doesn't beat, your lungs don't pump, or excuse me, did I say that right? Your heart beats, your lungs breathe. And if they're not doing that together, you're dead, right? Same kind of thing here. So there is definitely something to be said about really understanding the energy that's moving through your body and knowing that you get to control it. You get to control it. It's not going to take a pill. It's not even going to see a therapist sometimes. It is literally doing some action in your body. It's doing meditation. It's doing breath work. It's listening to different sounds, the music, and just kind of being more in tune with how you feel from the inside out. Well, a lot of us live very disembodied lives where we don't want to feel things because we've been hurt in the past, and hurting is not good for us in our minds, and our minds try to avoid pain and suffering. But I will tell you that the work that you do around your chakras and being able to find some balance is going to serve you so much better in your relationships, not only self-relationship, but relationships with people that you're around.
Yeah. I think what's interesting for me this past weekend is listening and learning about these chakras, reading about them for the past month. I've had some realizations about my yoga practice and times of avoidance with particular spaces in my body. Mm-hmm. So, for example, Wild Thing is one that I avoided for a couple years. And I remember the first time I did it again, right? I remember being in Jackie's class, and I had taken her class for, several weeks, a couple times, and she calls Wild Thing pretty frequently. And every time I was like, no. And then finally being kind of open and willing to do it. And when I remember that period of time, I think it started around a period of distrust with relationships and romantic ones, especially. I shared on the podcast about my experience with, an ex assaulting me. Mm-hmm. And so, again, it shook so much of my personal relationship foundations. Mm-hmm. I was very cold to people. I was very untrusting of others. I was very obsessive about certain things. I was very vindictive. And so I think that's where that closed off nature as it relates to that pose came from. And I also didn't do wheel. Yeah. I didn't do wheel for 4 years. I didn't do, Wild Thing for, 2-3 years. Willingness to do Wild Thing, willingness to do wheel, and willingness to and camel. I avoided camel. So yeah, there's 3 poses that are big chest openers. They're big heart openers that require a sense of trust in that space. Mm-hmm. And that's a lot, you know what I mean? Yeah. And I think then that willingness came with time and distance from that event, but also really hard reflection and personal work around that event, and even forgiveness around that time and space, which is hard. And I didn't start seriously doing that, because for at least a year after that event, was obsessed with it, was, very much fixated on it. Mm-hmm. 2 years, year 2 and year 3 after that event, ignored, because I recognized how much fixating on it,
the energy you were putting into it, right?
had hurt relationships. So I was like, I'm just not even fucking talking about this anymore. Right. Because clearly it's just negative, and it taints things, Then, and it's interesting, even, I do think I told Jair, my current partner, but not immediately. And before I would have been like, and this happened and I hate this
Yeah.
person
Yeah.
and we should go slash their tires, like that was year one, And so it took me a while to even tell Jair, not because I was embarrassed or ashamed, but because I didn't want it to ruin things. And not because I thought he would look at me differently, but because I just was so damn negative about it and so obsessive and so
angry. Yeah.
And so then, not until probably 4 years after that event do I go through this forgiveness procedure in a book that I read. Do I go through actually reflecting on and being introspective about this event, how it impacted me, how it impacted relationships, how I was still carrying guilt and frustration and anger, and then boom, I'm fixed. No.
Well, I wanted to ask you because I have a picture of you years ago when you did wheel for the first time. Remember in the old studio? I'll find it.
Are you talking about with Magenta's workshop?
Yes. And you had done wheel for the first time in like a long time. And you were like, wow, I haven't done this
4
in
years.
forever.
No,
Yeah.
literally 4 years.
Yeah. But I wanted to go back when you said like the first time, like when you were practicing and you felt a certain kind of way, was it after you tried to do Wild Thing or Camel or Wheel? Or was it like it was called in class and you immediately were like, no, I'm not doing that?
No,
was
immediately
it like,
no.
So it was like, it wasn't like you were like, I'm going to try it. And then you were like, oh, fuck this.
No,
you just
didn't even try.
You were just like, nope.
Yeah.
And that's a instinctual reaction, right?
Correct. Yeah. For me, I felt like it.
Yeah. So I would say that like, that's yourself trying to protect yourself, right? And you're not doing it because you know that when you have these open heart experiences, it can be rough. So it's interesting to me because I was there when you did wheel for the first time after 4 years of not doing wheel. And how did that make you feel?
I don't know. I mean,
like reflecting back, I remember you being like, holy shit, I haven't done this pose in forever. I just kind of remember you saying something along those lines, like sitting there.
I mean, I knew, and I literally went to this workshop because I was like, I've clearly been avoiding this, and I want someone to break it down and make me feel like I can do it.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I'm fairly confident I could do it that whole time.
You totally physically for sure.
And I had done it before.
Yeah.
It was just like a major avoidance. And I think I knew putting myself in this scenario where I couldn't avoid it, where the whole damn point was to do a fucking wheel.
Yeah.
You know? And maybe I still could have sat there and said, no, I just came to this workshop to watch. I don't know, but
I'm not doing it right now.
But I also think Magenta has a very beautiful way of teaching that is encouraging, but not forceful.
Right.
So it also felt like, well, whenever you're ready. And I was like, okay, well, when am I ready? I guess I'm ready to go, and
right.
So emotionally, how did I feel? I mean, I guess there's some level of pride, and excitement that like, oh, I can do this thing that I was avoiding, and I avoided so much that I didn't know if I could do it,
Yeah.
Despite having a fair amount of mobility in my body. So a level of excitement. It's still one that is like tough.
Yeah.
Like when I hear it called in a class, I have to almost like hype myself up.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And or slash also I can't give myself time to think about it.
Oh yeah.
If I think
you're not going to do it.
It's like, well, damn. Like sometimes like we did it, one teacher offered it this weekend and she was like, well, we're going to do wheels. So if you would like to blah, blah. I was like, oh, fuck, we're doing wheel. Versus there's a set sequence at one of the studios that I work at that I do know wheels coming, but the set sequence goes pretty swiftly so that, I do bridge and then it's like, okay, it's time for wheel. Plant my hands. And usually what I do is I count down, or what do I do? I go up on an exhale. Mm-hmm. So it's forceful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do that too.
And I usually take a breath in and it's like, well, as soon as you start exhaling, you're going to move.
Yeah.
And I just and then if I miss it, I'm like, well, damn, I didn't do it.
Yeah.
And that happens sometimes, but I can't give myself too much time to think about wheel, which is interesting.
And let's like give our listeners that don't know what we're talking about. Like think about your body, right? Your heart is behind your rib cage. And if you look at most humans now, they're all walking around slumped over, right? We're reading our phones, we're on our computers, we're driving, we're sitting at a desk. We're always protecting our heart space, right? We have rib cage on the back that protects our heart, ribs on the front protects our heart. In postures that are called heart opening postures in yoga, like camel, wheel, wild thing, you'll see that it's a big opening because you're extending your spine. You're also opening the space around your heart, your collarbones, and it's an area of your body that is used to being protected.
Well, and you're completely exposed.
Yeah, you're exposed.
Outside of the anatomy, you're genuinely exposed.
Like Maddie said, like somebody could come and slice your throat.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and with wheel, my hands are down. They're pinned beneath me. If I want to stay in this pose, I can't swat someone away who's coming my way. I can't. I can't do anything.
No.
Except come down to the mat and potentially snap my neck, so it's very vulnerable in a number of ways.
Well, and it's hard pose to do to begin with. Not only that, you're upside down.
Yep.
And you're open.
Yep.
So then it's like your proprioception, your relationship to gravity and space is like fucked up.
Yeah.
And even if you wanted to figure out a way to get out of it, it's a scary place to be.
Yeah. You're upside down, exposed, and backwards.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And like when I remember like going through teacher training and learning about these postures, I would always do a lot of research about each posture if I was going to teach it as a peak pose, because I wanted people to feel that they could do it, whether or not they pushed into their hands, straighten their arms, and straighten their legs. It's like still ways that you can do wheel, right? And giving people the experience of just a little open heart can be a lot. The other thing is with camel, which is a kneeling position that you are standing up on your knees, and you have your hands into your kind of low back area, and then you extend your heart. A lot of times in yoga, we'll say back bends, right? We hear that a lot. Like, I did a back bend. Well, I don't like the word back bend because it sounds painful, right? And it's not a bend, it's an extension. The front of your spine is in the front of your body. So you're actually opening your spine when you do these heart opening poses, these extensions. So with camel, you'll see a lot of people crank their head back, or they'll push too hard on their kidneys, right above their kidneys or their adrenal glands. So when they come back down, they feel sick. They feel like they're dizzy. They may feel like they're going to throw up, because we're sending signals to your sympathetic nervous system to be like, oh shit, something's wrong. Your heart is open and you're not protecting it.
Yeah. So I tell that story to say that I think energetically what had happened in my body and what had happened in my life took shape physically in the practice, right?
Yeah.
And I can actually go through that with a number of poses, but since we're talking about heart chakra today, I'm going to leave it there. But it's interesting, and it's tough because you can't really, maybe you can. If you can recognize it in the moment, that's impressive. I personally cannot usually recognize these experiences or these blockages in the moment.
Yeah.
Unless I'm doing a lot of deep personal work, but then and especially at that period of time in my life, I hadn't even gone through yoga teacher training yet. So all that to say, I definitely hadn't started practicing reflecting in that way, shape, form, or fashion. But yeah, so these things can kind of take shape physically because of the energy in the body, and vice versa.
Yeah. And kind of wrap this all up a little bit. When you think about your yoga practice, right? You think about these postures, there's intentions behind the postures. They're designed in ways that are going to invoke energy, action, feeling, and energetic transaction. Something's going to happen in that posture, and take that learning and apply it to your life, right? Because what you practice on your mat is going to help you off your mat. It's going to help you be a kinder person, a more patient person, a more loving person. So get yourself some green, right? Wear the color green. Surround yourself with people that are like-minded. Go take a yoga class, spend some time embodying these feelings that you have or your chakra system, and learn about it, because there's nobody else that's going to teach you better than you.
Yeah. And I'll recommend the book that we read for this module. It's The Sevenfold Journey. We can link it in the show notes, but I'm obsessed with this book. I told my group I'm proselytizing for this book.
Yeah, you are. Yeah, you are. And our guest, Susi's book, The Centered Heart, She's at yourcenteredheart.com. Please go out there, get a copy of it, read her book. There's so much great information in there. She's even has links that you can go and practice with her. I'm so excited. She sent us a meditation. So after next week's follow-up episode, we will have on that Thursday, we'll have Susi's meditation to share with you guys. Susi, if you're listening, thank you so much. So grateful to meet you. And it's just interesting how the universe brings different people into your life at different times. And I needed a little Susi in my life.
Definitely.
Cool.
If you are listening, it would be extremely helpful if you left us a review wherever you found this podcast.
A nice one, a nice review. Please, not just kidding. Everybody's been really nice, actually.
Yeah.
We haven't gotten any shitty reviews yet. Hopefully we won't.
I hope this didn't invoke that. But
yeah, exactly. We didn't piss off somebody's heart chakra.
We are a small podcast, and those reviews are extremely helpful for us, not only in helping the podcast find new listeners, but also helping us grow and improve this podcast.
Yeah.
If you are interested in being on the show, it is linked in our show notes. It is linked in our Instagram at Yoga Changed. You can DM us at Yoga Changed, and you can also email us at, email us. Yes, and it's hard to say at yogachanged@gmail.com. The email is yogachanged@gmail.com.
Yep. Rate, review, subscribe, share this episode with someone. Heart disease and heart issues are so prevalent in our country, in the world. So give this gift of Susi's book to someone that you love, and this podcast to someone that you love. Follow us online. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we will see you next week.
Bye, yogis.